Why did they all look at her like she didn't belong? Private First Class Jessica Carter stood at the far edge of the firing range, the Georgia sun baking the brim of her helmet. Sweat traced a slow line down her temple, stinging her eyes. But she refused to blink. The others, taller, broader, heavier, handled their M249s with a kind of brutish ease. Their boots dug into the dirt, shoulders squared, weapons coughing out bursts that seemed to lock the targets in place. Her own weapon felt different, heavy, alive, and had a mind of its own. And today, it didn't seem to like her. Carter. The voice cracked through the summer heat like a rifle shot. Drill Sergeant Michael "Thunder" Rodriguez was already striding toward her. Eyes narrowed under his brimmed hat. His boots crushed the gravel with the same certainty that seemed to be missing in her stance. "You're spraying lead all over the Georgia countryside. This isn't a garden hose. This is a precision instrument." Jessica swallowed the frustration rising in her throat. She adjusted her stance again, feet shoulder-width apart, left knee bent slightly, arms tightened into the stock. The M249 trembled in her grip, a beast pawing the ground before the charge. "I can do this," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This isn't about technique, Carter," Rodriguez barked. "It's about physics. That weapon generates 1,200 pounds of recoil force. You don't have the body mass to control it. You're gonna fight it every damn time you squeeze that trigger." Somewhere behind him, Staff Sergeant David Iron Thompson shook his head, muttering something under his breath. He'd seen her on the range before, each time the same fine on single-shot weapons. Almost surgical, but give her a squad automatic weapon, and it looked like she was wrestling a wild animal. "Maybe you should think about a different emos," he called out, louder this time. "There's no shame in knowing your limits." Jessica didn't even turn toward him. She just recentered her grip and spoke to the weapon in her head the way she had since the first time. She picked it up. "We're going to figure this out. You and me." From the far corner of the range, Master Sergeant Linda Martinez was watching, arms folded, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She'd seen Carter's file. Her marksmanship scores with rifles were exceptional, near record setting, but M249 was a different animal. Sustained fire wasn't about picking a target and sending one perfect round. It was about dominating the space, keeping heads down, creating time and safety for the rest of the team. And that took more muscle than Carter had. At least, that's what everyone thought. The first burst kicked hard into her shoulder. She tried to counter, shifting her stance, bracing tighter. The weapon bucked like a live thing, the barrel climbing, her aim wandering off target. Gust erupted. Near the berm where her rounds went wide, Rodriguez threw his arms up. "You're fighting it. Stop fighting it." Her breathing quickened, but she forced herself to slow it, to feel the rhythm of the gun instead of forcing her own. She'd been thinking about this for weeks long after lights out in the barracks, sketching diagrams in the corner of her notebook, studying recoil patterns like someone else might study a dance routine. The gun wanted to move. Fine. Let it. But guide it. Ride the rhythm instead of breaking it. She adjusted her stance again. But this time, not to plant harder, to flow with it. Shoulders loose, elbows locked, but not rigid. Her cheek welded to the stock. She closed her eyes for a half-second, imagining the burst before she fired. The next stream of rounds landed closer, tighter, still off-center, but the groupings were beginning to form. "Better," Martinez called from across the range. Her voice even. Rodriguez grunted, unconvinced. That night in the barracks, Jessica sat on her bunk with the weapon's technical manual open in her lap. The others either cleaning gear or watching something on their phones. She traced her finger down the ballistic charts, muttering numbers to herself. 1,200 pounds of recoil, distributed over a burst, offset by stance angle. Breathing cycle time to muzzle rise. It wasn't about overpowering the weapon. It was about anticipating it, shaping each burst like a curve instead of a straight fight. "Hey, Carter," one of the guys across the room said, leaning back in his chair. "You studying for physics class or trying to shoot straight?" A few chuckles drifted across the room. She didn't look up. "Maybe both," she said quietly. The truth was, she was studying for something else entirely, something none of them could see yet. 3 months later, she'd have her chance to prove it. Operation Iron Shield. The name itself carried weight in the pre-mission briefing. The air in the forward operating base outside Damascus felt thick with heat and expectation. Captain Robert Havoc Williams stood at the front, the map behind him glowing under a red light. "Intelligence shows a training camp here," he said, tapping the valley on the map. "Multiple hardened positions, layered defenses. Our objective is leadership neutralization and immediate extraction. Carter, you'll be carrying the M249. You're our primary suppressive fire for the assault teams." Jessica's eyes scanned the satellite images. The camp sat in a natural amphitheater, surrounded by jagged rock. Every position up high was an advantage for them, a disadvantage for the Rangers moving in. Without suppression, any advance would be suicide. Sergeant first. Class Marcus, Gunnar, Davis leaned in toward her after the briefing. "Carter, this isn't training. These guys aren't paper targets if you can't keep them pinned. My men are going to take rounds." She met his gaze evenly. "I understand, but I've been working on something. It's not about muscling through. This is combat, not a science fair project." He cut in. "Just be ready." She didn't argue, but in her head, she could already see the angles. The patterns, hours later, in position on a rocky ridge overlooking the northern line. Jessica lay prone, the M249 pressed into her shoulder. Through her optic, the enemy positions came alive movement between sandbag walls. The faint glint of glass from a scope, a puff of dust where boots landed, her breathing slowed. "Precision. This is Havoc." Williams' voice crackled in her headset. "Assault teams in position. You've got 200 rounds. Make them count." She smiled faintly at the call sign. Precision. She hadn't chosen it, but she intended to earn it. "Roger," she said, engaging northern positions. The first burst rolled out, not in a chaotic spray, but in a controlled rhythm, her breathing, her grip, the recoil all moving as one. The rounds struck home, cutting through the opening of an enemy machine gun nest. From somewhere below, Alpha Leader's voice came back, urgent and amazed. "Precision. I don't know what you're doing up there, but keep it coming. You're hitting targets I can barely see." Jessica didn't respond. She didn't need to. Every second she spoke was a second she wasn't keeping someone alive. Her world had narrowed to the reticle, the heat of the barrel, the steady thump of the stock against her shoulder. Her technique wasn't just working, it was keeping the team moving, and she wasn't even close to finished. The second burst was shorter, tighter, cleaner. Jessica felt it in her bones, now the weapon's rhythm, the way it spoke back through the stock into her shoulder. Each round part of a pattern she could almost see in the air. Muzzle flashes winked in the distance like brief flares before going dark. Each extinguished in measured beats. The valley was alive with gunfire. Enemy tracers arced like burning insects through the heat shimmer, cutting across the angles of the rock. She could hear rounds slap into stone near her position. Sharp pops, followed by the duller crack of fragments scattering. The air smelled of cordite and hot metal. Contact, multiple positions. "We're taking heavy fire." Alpha Leader's voice snapped in her ear. Through her optic, she caught the source, 3 fighters moving between 2 stone outcroppings. A machine gun team already setting up behind a sandbag wall. She exhaled slowly, pressed the trigger, and sent a 5-round burst exactly where they crouched. The muzzle flash on their side winked out. Her finger eased off the trigger before the barrel could climb. She shifted 2 inches right, scanning. There a mortar crew fumbling to load a round. One man's hands flashing white in the sunlight. 7 rounds, not a single one wasted. Mortar tube tipped sideways before they could fire. In her headset, Captain Williams' voice came again, sharper this time. Precision. That's exactly what we need. Keep that northern line suppressed. Jessica didn't look up. She didn't nod. She just found the next target. Below, Alpha Team advanced between jagged boulders, breaking into short sprints before diving behind cover. Every time an enemy tried to peek over, her bursts sent them ducking back down, or worse, this wasn't how they taught suppression in training. The manuals called for long bursts to saturate an area, to keep heads down through sheer volume, but Jessica had learned the flaw in that. Too long, and you lost your accuracy. Too scattered, and you burned through ammo before it mattered. She wasn't just suppressing, she was controlling. Bravo team to precision, another voice broke in. Strained and urgent. We're pinned. Down at grid 2-3-4-5-6-7, multiple hardened bunkers, requesting immediate support. Our heart rate spiked. Those bunkers were farther than most machine gunners could manage effective fire 450. Maybe more, but she'd trained for that. Bravo, I have your position, she replied, rolling her shoulders to loosen the tightness building there. She zeroed her optic, adjusted for range, and read the wind through the dancing dust. 3-round burst ME-MG position. She watched the crew crumple. 4-round sniper in a high nest. His muzzle glint just barely visible. He dropped without a sound. 6 rounds mortar team shifting to cover Bravo's flank. The tube spun away as both men collapsed. Holy! Bravo leader's voice cracked. You just eliminated 3 positions. In under 10 seconds with a saw, Jessica didn't answer. Her hands were already moving, her breathing syncing with the rhythm of each burst, but the fight was changing. From the corner of her eye, she caught movement on the ridge beyond dust, rising in thick plumes. The glint of weapons in the sun, enemy reinforcements, and not a handful. Dozens, all teams, Williams called. His voice tight now. Intel was wrong. We've got 30 plus. Moving in from the east and south. Precision. We need maximum suppressive fire to cover extraction. Jessica's gut twisted. She knew what the manual would say. Increase burst length. Expand coverage. Burn ammo faster to create space for the retreat. But she also knew she couldn't get resupplied. She had what she had, 200 rounds. Minus what she'd already spent. A quick glance at her feed, 50 rounds gone. 150 left, 30 targets, maybe more. She made her choice. All teams. She keyed the mic. I'm going to engage reinforcements individually. Keep moving, I'll stall them. It felt reckless. It was reckless. But this was the only way. She shifted her scope to the first target. A fighter with an RPG jogging between 2 slabs of rock. 2 rounds. Center mass. He folded instantly. Machine gun team at 420 meters, 3 rounds to the chest of one. Head of the other. Both dropped before their gun was set. Squad leader waving his men forward at 350 meters, 2 rounds. One to the throat, one to the head. The group faltered, confusion breaking their momentum. Precision. Alpha. Leader's voice came again, tinged with disbelief. You're killing them faster than we can spot them. The advance is stalled. Her magazine count ticked in her head. 100 rounds left, maybe 110. And still they came. Every burst had to matter. Sniper at 493 rounds, 1 clean hit to the head. Mortar team at 445, 4 rounds. Both men down. 2 rolling uselessly into the dirt. RPG team at 375, 2 rounds. Launcher clattering to the ground. She wasn't thinking about the noise, or the heat of the barrel, or the ache starting to creep up her forearms. Her mind was a quiet space where only 2 things existed. Target and the shortest path to neutralizing it. The extraction call came over the net like a pressure valve releasing. All teams, this is Havoc. Extraction point is clear. Begin withdrawal in sequence. Below, the squads began peeling back. bounding from cover to cover toward the LZ. But Jessica stayed prone, her scope sweeping. Any enemy who rose to fire on her retreating teammates didn't last long. By the time the last man reached the bird, her ammo count was 5. Precision ammo? Davis' voice. 5 rounds remaining, Sergeant. She answered, calm despite the ringing in her ears. She didn't fire them, not unless she had to. Those last 5 were for the moment when it would matter most. It never came. When she finally pulled back, the fight was over. The numbers were staggering: 50 confirmed kills, 195 rounds fired, no friendly casualties. The others talked about it in low voices on the flight back, still glancing at her like they were trying to understand what they'd just seen. Davis broke the silence. Carter, what you did today, Hal, I've never seen anything like it. That wasn't suppression. That was precision gunnery at sniper level with a saw. Williams nodded from across the cabin. I've been infantry 12 years. Today changed how I think about automatic weapons. You proved that physics isn't the only factor in this game. Jessica didn't answer right away. She just sat back, her hands resting lightly on the weapon. She'd proved something, yes, but she knew this was only the beginning. The helicopter ride back to the forward operating base was louder than the firefight. Not in decibels, those nothing could match, but in the restless noise of adrenaline wearing off. Boots shuffled against the deck. Velcro ripped open as medics checked gear. Water bottles cracked and sloshed. And yet, somehow, it all sounded far away to Jessica. Her hands were still curled in the ghost shape of the M249's grip, her fingers twitching every so often like the weapon was still there, still feeding that steady rhythm into her bones. She didn't notice Sergeant First Class Marcus Gunnar Davis watching her from across the cabin until he spoke. You're quiet. She looked up, blinked. I'm always quiet after a mission. Yeah, he said, leaning forward over his knees. But today's different. She tilted her head slightly, unsure if he was accusing her of something or trying to praise her. What you did back there? He shook his head slowly. You don't see that. Not with a saw, ever. Before she could answer, Captain Robert Havek Williams turned from the cockpit area. His face was unreadable, but his voice carried weight. Carter, I've been in this line of work for over a decade. I've trained, led, and buried machine gunners. You just redefined the role in under 20 minutes. Jessica didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She let the hum of the rotors fill the space. Back at the FOB, the debrief was clinical, at least at first. Coordinates, target identifications, timestamps. Each confirmed kill was checked against helmet cam footage and drone feeds. The intel officer in charge kept glancing up from the screen, like he was waiting for someone to tell him this was a joke. 50 confirmed, 195 rounds fired, he finally said, setting the clipboard down. That's a 26 to 1 round to kill ratio. A younger sergeant in the back whistled low. That's sniper math. It's beyond sniper math, the intel officer said, with an automatic weapon. This isn't in any playbook I've read. Martinez had been leaning against the wall, arms folded. Now she stepped forward. It's not in the playbook because we've been teaching it wrong. Williams raised an eyebrow. Go on. Look at her technique, Martinez said, nodding toward Jessica. She's not overpowering the weapon, she's working with it. Her biomechanics, her stance, even her breathing. It's all synced to the recoil cycle. The gun isn't fighting her, it's part of her. The room went quiet for a moment. Davis finally broke it. So what? We rewrite the manual? Martinez didn't smile, but her tone was certain. Maybe we start by rethinking who we hand this weapon to in the first place. That night, Jessica sat alone in the dim light of the barracks common room, her weapon broken down on the table before her. Not because it needed cleaning, she'd already done that, but because she wanted to see it in pieces, to remember that it wasn't magic, it was just steel, springs, and math. She traced her finger along the feed tray. remembering every burst from earlier in the day. Not the kills. Those didn't sit in her mind as numbers or faces, but the moments in between, the seconds where she'd been certain she'd run out of time, where the barrel's heat felt like it was going to warp her aim, where a breath, too soon or too late, would have meant a missed shot. She thought of the RPG gunner, the one whose eyes she'd seen through the scope just before she fired. There hadn't been anger in them, just focus, the same kind she'd had. Her hands paused over the bolt carrier group. She wondered if anyone in that camp had been taught the way she'd been taught. That suppression was about force, not finesse, maybe. He'd been taught wrong. 2 days later, Martinez found her on the range. "You've got an audience," the master sergeant said, jerking her chin toward the bleachers where a handful of instructors sat. Jessica squinted against the sun. "For what?" "Your after-action report made it all the way back to Benning. They want to see what you do." Jessica adjusted her sling and stepped up to the firing line. There were no targets in neat rows today, only a scattering of steel silhouettes at varying distances, some hidden behind partial cover. 200 rounds, Martinez said. "Show them what precision looks like." She didn't think about impressing anyone. She just did what she'd done in the valley. Short, disciplined. Bursts, adjustments in inches, not feet. Each target engaged like it was the only one on the field. By the time the belt ran dry, every silhouette had fallen. The instructors didn't clap, didn't cheer. They just sat there with the same faintly unsettled look the intel officer had worn in the debrief. One of them, a grizzled sergeant major, with a voice like gravel, finally spoke. "You ever think about teaching this?" Jessica wiped a line of sweat from her forehead. "I never thought about it until now." The offer came a week later. Temporary assignment to Fort Benning. Assistant revising the automatic weapons curriculum. Demonstrate the Carter method. To select candidates, she read the orders twice before packing her bag. It felt strange trading the dust and danger of Syria for the sterile, controlled chaos of a training base. But she knew what was at stake. Somewhere out there, another smaller than average soldier was being told they weren't built for the weapon. Somewhere out there, another target would need to be taken down with the last rounds in the belt. If she could teach one person to do what she'd done, it would be worth the trade. When she stepped onto the range at Benning for the first class, she saw skepticism in their faces. A few of the trainees were big easily twice her weight and clearly thought they'd been sent to watch some special case story. She didn't start with the gun. She started with breathing, with balance, with the idea that the weapon was a partner, not a problem. "Most of you are taught to fight the gun," she said. "You muscle it, pin it, force it to stay where you want. That burns your energy and your accuracy. I want you to think of it differently. I want you to listen to it." A few of them exchanged glances. She didn't care. By the end of the day, 2 of the smallest soldiers in the group were grouping their bursts tighter than the biggest men on the line. Martinez, who'd come to watch, just nodded once and said, "Told you." Back in her quarters that night, Jessica sat by the window. The base lights glowing in the humid air. She thought about the valley in Syria, about the heat on her cheek and the crackle in her headset. She thought about the quiet after each burst, the way the world seemed to hold its breath for a second before the next move, and she thought about what Martinez had told her in the beginning, when it had sounded like doubt but turned out to be a challenge. "You're not strong enough for this." Maybe strength wasn't the right measure after all. It didn't take long for the pushback to start. Jessica had expected skepticism from the trainees. She hadn't expected it from the instructors. The first official demonstration of what was now being called the Carter method drew a full row of them, their arms folded, their caps low, expressions tight. They'd been teaching the M249 for years, decades in some cases. They'd seen all types come and go, and here was a sergeant barely in her mid-20s, telling them they'd been doing it wrong. The first volley of criticism came before she'd even fired a shot. "You're teaching bad habits," one of Dem said flatly. Short bursts like that don't keep heads down. You're wasting the saw's capacity, another added. It's called a squad automatic weapon for a reason. You're supposed to keep it hot, Jessica let them talk. Let them lay out the same argument she'd heard in the barracks at Benning when she was still struggling to keep her sights on target. When they finished, she just nodded once and turned back to the firing line. 200 rounds, 50 targets. Scattered at distances from 50 to 500 meters, she took her time, just like in the valley, short bursts. Each one an answer to a question only she could hear. By the time the belt ran dry, every target was down, not chipped, not grazed down. When she turned, most of the instructors weren't meeting her eyes. A few were, "You're still not keeping." "Heads down," the first critic muttered. She let a faint smile tug at the corner of her mouth. "No," she said. "I'm taking them off the field entirely." Word spread faster than she expected. A week later, she got an email marked priority from an officer at the infantry school headquarters, requesting your presence at Curriculum Review Board. When she arrived, the boardroom was already full colonels, senior NCOs, a couple of civilian consultants. Colonel Patricia Steele Rain Johnson, the commandant herself, was at the head of the table. "Sergeant Carter," Johnson said without preamble, "I've read your after-action reports. I've seen the footage. What I want to know is can you teach this at scale?" Jessica paused. "Yes, MAAM, but not if we keep selecting gunners based on size instead of skill." Johnson's eyebrow arched slightly, but she didn't object. "We've been making certain assumptions for a long time," she said. "Maybe. It's time we stop." The changes didn't happen overnight. For every open-minded instructor who saw the value in precision over volume, there were 3 who clung to the old ways. "This isn't how it's done in combat," they'd argue. "When rounds are coming in, you don't think about math. You think about fire superiority." Jessica didn't try to argue them into agreement. She let the results do the talking. The trainees who learned her method were consistently hitting more targets, wasting fewer rounds, and staying effective longer before fatigue set in. The data was impossible to ignore. By the end of the quarter, Fort Benning had officially added a module on precision automatic fire to the advanced training program. They didn't rename it the Carter method in the manual. Jessica didn't care about that. She cared that it was there. But just as she was starting to settle into the rhythm of teaching, the call came. Martinez found her in the instructor's lounge, her expression sharp. "Pack your kit. You're going back out." Jessica's brow furrowed. "What's the mission?" "Different theater, different stakes. You'll get the details in brief. But I'll tell you this, it's the kind of operation where your method isn't just useful. It's the only shot we've got." The briefing room smelled faintly of coffee and desert dust, even though they were still stateside. The map on the screen showed a rugged stretch of terrain along a disputed border. Intelligence had flagged a fortified smuggling hub run by a coalition of well-armed insurgents. The area was thick with hardened bunkers and interconnected tunnels. "They've got a single choke point," the mission planner said, tapping the screen. "The only way in for our assault team is a narrow pass here. Enemy has interlocking fields of fire covering the approach. Standard suppression won't cut it. They've got the angles." Jessica didn't need to be told why she was in the room. "You'll be on overwatch from here," the planner continued, indicating a ridgeline about 600 meters from the choke point. "Ammo resupply will be impossible once you're in position. You'll have one belt, 200 rounds. On the flight in, she went through her checklist the way she always did, not just gear, but her own body, shoulder tension, breathing rhythm, grip memory. She could feel the old weight creeping in the pressure that came with knowing the missions. Success hinged on her. But it wasn't fear. It was focus, sharpening her thoughts until all the noise dropped away. Martinez sat beside her, eyes forward. "This is going to be worse than Syria," she said quietly. "They know we're coming." Jessica nodded once. Then we'll make sure they can't stop us. Insertion was quiet, almost eerily so. The ridgeline loomed above the pass, jagged and dark against the early dawn light. She sat up prone, the M249 braced on its bipod, her optics sweeping the approaches. Movement flickered at the edge's shadows that resolved into fighters hauling crates, checking weapons, pacing along the walls of their positions. Through her headset, Alpha team in position, awaiting overwatch signal. She exhaled, felt the earth under her chest, and pressed the trigger. The first 3 bursts were like tapping on glass, precise, sharp, perfectly placed. Each one cut a gap in the enemy's line, a sudden absence that threw the others into disarray. They responded fast. Muzzle flashes erupted from a dozen points at once, tracers ripping toward her ridge. She shifted just enough to stay outside their guesswork, returning fire in surgical bursts. 600 meters wasn't forgiving. Every shot demanded adjustment, wind drift, barrel heat, minute changes in target exposure. But she'd built her method for this. One by one, the key guns went silent. In the valley below, Alpha team moved. The pass that should have been a death trap was suddenly survivable. Overwatch, this is Alpha, their leader called. We're through the choke point. Keep their heads. He stopped mid-sentence. Correction, keep them down permanently. Jessica's mouth twitched into a small smile. By the time the assault team reached their objective, she'd fired 172 rounds. 56 confirmed kills. No wasted bursts. When they called extraction, her belt still had 28 rounds left. Enough for whatever might have followed them out. Nothing did. That night, back at base, Martinez slid a cup of coffee toward her. You know, you just proved it again. Right? Under even worse odds, Jessica stared into the dark surface of the coffee. I wasn't proving anything. I was doing the job. Martinez leaned back in her chair. That's exactly why it works. The orders came down less than a month after the border operation. This one wasn't just risky, it was political. Jessica knew something was different the moment she stepped into the briefing room and saw the wall monitors switched to secure mode. No windows open except the mission slides. Everyone in the room wore the same flat expression. The kind that meant the details were sensitive enough that they didn't have time for preamble. Martinez was there, so was Colonel Johnson. The map that came up showed a compound tucked into the edge of a coastal city, a dense cluster of low buildings surrounded by walls and guarded choke points. But it wasn't the architecture that caught Jessica's attention. It was the markers, blue for friendly hostages, red for armed combatants, and there were a lot more red than blue. The compound's holding 22 civilian hostages, Johnson said. NGOs, aid workers, some of them high profile enough that this is going to be on every news feed in 12 hours if we fail. She clicked the slide, zoomed in. The problem is here. She pointed to a shaded corner of the compound. Sniper Overwatch, plus an entrenched machine gun team, both cover the only viable breach point. If they open up, no one makes it across. Martinez glanced at Jessica, then back at the colonel. She's why you called me in, isn't she? Jessica asked. Johnson didn't blink. You'll have a rooftop position on the adjacent block. 200 rounds, no resupply. You'll be responsible for keeping those positions neutralized for as long as it takes the assault team to breach, secure, and extract every hostage. In the transport on the way in, Jessica sat cross-legged on the floor, checking her weapon in the dim red light. The urban environment was a different animal. Distance wouldn't be the only challenge. Angles, ricochets, and unpredictable lines of sight would be in play. Her mental calculations spun quietly in the background. 6 seconds between enemy exposure cycles. Probable shift patterns for Overwatch. Barrel heat management. Martinez sat across from her, hands clasped between her knees. This one's going to get messy, she said. They'll use the hostages as shields the second they know we're here. Jessica met her eyes. then I won't give them the time to think about it. Insertion was fast. Two birds came in low, using the taller city blocks as cover before dropping their teams on separate rooftops. Jessica's position was narrower rooftop no more than 20 feet across, bordered by crumbling brick and rusted rail. From here, she could see into the compound's courtyard, the breach wall, and most importantly, the two firing positions that could end the mission before it started. She slid prone, bipod down, scope up. The world tightened into the circle of her optic. Overwatch, this is Alpha. The assault team leader's voice came through. We're in position. Stand by for go signal. Through the glass, she spotted the first sniper, lean frame, tucked behind a corner with a steady lane to the breach point. His scope flashed. Briefly as he adjusted, she shifted her hold, let her breathing find that familiar sync, and tapped a trigger. 2 rounds. The first punched through his scope. The second through his eye. Overwatch, Alpha Sniper 1 down, green light. The breach charge went off like the clap of thunder in a canyon. Dust and brick shrapnel erupted, and the assault team poured in. That's when the machine gun team made their move. They came out of a concealed window, weapon already braced. The muzzle swung toward the breach point where the first squad was halfway through. 3 rounds from Jessica's M249 cut them down before the barrel had even leveled. But she didn't relax. Urban fights had a way of changing fast inside the compound. The fight was chaos, shouted commands, the crack of rifles, the occasional scream. Through her scope, Jessica scanned every opening, every shadow that might hide a shooter. A man appeared in a doorway, dragging one of the hostages in front of him, muzzle pressed to the hostage's temple. He was screaming something she couldn't hear over comms, but his body language was clear. He was trying to slow the team. Jessica's finger hovered over the trigger. She could make the shot 2 rounds, a fraction of an inch clearance from the hostage's head. But if she missed, her breath caught. She wasn't thinking about the numbers now. She was thinking about the fact that she could see the hostage's eyes. Wide, frozen, she shifted, adjusting for the man's sway as he yelled. When he turned his head to shout something over his shoulder, she took it. 2 rounds. The man dropped. The hostage staggered forward, blinking like he didn't understand why he was still alive. The minutes stretched. Jessica's round count ticked lower, 70 left, then 50. Compound's defenders began to realize someone was cutting them down before they could even find cover. They started firing blind toward the rooftops, but she stayed low, shifting between firing lanes, never staying in the same window twice, one by one. The hostages were moved toward the extraction route. That's when she saw movement on the far wall, 3 fighters scaling it with rifles slung. They weren't going for the breach. They were going for the rooftops, her rooftop. Overwatch to Alpha, we've got climbers on my wall. 3 of them. Negative on sending support. Alpha replied immediately. We've got the last hostages moving. You're on your own. Jessica swung the M249 toward the edge, knowing the bipod would be useless here. She braced the weapon against her shoulder and sighted down as the first helmet rose over the edge. 3-round burst. Gone. The second man came up faster, almost too fast for her to adjust, but she used the momentum. Let the recoil walk her rounds into him. The third was already halfway up. She could see the strain in his face as he pulled himself over. He reached for his rifle, click, belt empty. She didn't think. She rolled to her side, ripped a fresh belt from her pouch, fed it in, slammed the cover closed, and came back up. 2 rounds. The man pitched backward into the alley. By the time Alpha called all clear, Jessica had 8 rounds left. The hostages were safe. No friendly casualties. Every enemy position neutralized. Back on the bird, Martinez leaned over and spoke, low so only Jessica could hear. You know, this one's going to be harder to explain than Syria. People don't believe you can be that precise under fire, but you keep proving it. Jessica looked out the open side door, the city dropping away below them. I'm not proving it, she said. I'm making sure nobody has to guess whether it's possible. By the time the hostage rescue footage made its way up the chain, Jessica's name was already on the lips of people she'd never met. Not in the loud, medal-pinning, hero of the day kind of way. The people talking about her operated in quieter rooms with no windows, where the walls hummed faintly from the servers beyond them. They weren't interested in her story for inspiration. They were interested in what she could do. The call came to her quarters at Fort Benning. Late on a Sunday, no rank exchanged, no introduction. Just a voice that was calm in a way that made her think of cold water. Sergeant Carter. Your presence is requested at Bragg tomorrow at 0600. Bring your gear. This is not a training assignment. Click. The next morning, she was in a conference room with 3 people she'd never seen before. All dressed in plain clothes. They didn't give names. One of them set a folder on the table and opened it to a grainy satellite image. This is the AO, he said. Remote border region, triple canopy jungle. Enemy insurgents with a mix of small arms, light machine guns, and at least 2 heavy positions. One of our teams has compromised 6 operators pinned in an old mining station. No clear extraction route without suppressing those heavy positions. Jessica studied the image. Her first question came quietly. How far from the nearest firing position to their exfil corridor? The man on the right answered without looking at notes. Between 450 and 520 meters. And how much ammo do I get? 200 rounds, the first man said. Standard belt. You'll be positioned on a ridgeline to the east. No resupply. Her eyes lifted from the map. So you've read my file. The man on the left leaned back slightly, just enough for her to see the hint of a smile. We don't call people in here unless we have. When she stepped off the bird into the thick green of the jungle, the air felt heavy enough to drink. Heat pressed in from all sides. The smell of wet earth and rotting leaves mixing with the faint metallic tang of the M249 in her hands. Her insertion point was a jagged outcrop barely wide enough to lie prone. Below, the jungle rolled away into a tangle of vines and shadow. Somewhere in that shadow, the trap team was waiting for a gap in the enemy's line. She adjusted her bipod on the uneven stone, dialed in her optic, and listened to the forest. It was never quiet, always the hiss of insects, the distant calls of birds, but underneath, she caught the sharper sounds, footsteps in wet soil, the metallic clink of a belt being loaded. Her headset crackled. Overwatch, this is Hammer 2-1. We're ready to move on your call. Through the glass, she found the first heavy gun position sandbags set into a narrow clearing. 2 gunners scanning the tree line. They didn't know she was here yet. 3 rounds. Both went down before they could reach for the triggers. The second position was harder to spot. She caught it only because of a shift in the leaves where the barrel jutted out for a split second. 4 rounds. The barrel dipped, then vanished. Overwatch. This is Hammer, the voice came again, quick and low. We're moving. Keep those eyes up. The jungle erupted, shouts in a language she didn't know. Muzzle flashes flaring like fireflies in the undergrowth. The team was halfway between the mining station and the extraction corridor when the real push came, fighters pouring out from behind half-rotted logs, from holes dug into the hillside from the trees themselves. Jessica's world narrowed to bursts in breath. 2 rounds here, 3 there. A pause to let the barrel cool while she shifted 2 degrees left. She worked the ridge like a conductor, leading an orchestra of chaos, every note precise, every pause calculated. Then she saw him, one of the trap team, moving slower than the others. His left arm limp against his side. He stumbled over a root, went down to one knee. The man covering him was trying to return fire and drag him at the same time. Jessica recognized the second man instantly, Sergeant Cole Weaver. They'd gone through basic together. He was the first to volunteer to carry her pack on the day she could barely lift her own body weight after drills. The first to tell her, "You've got more grit than anyone here." Don't waste it proving things to people who've already decided they're not listening. Now he was in her scope, his jaw clenched, his movements slowing as more muzzle flashes bloomed in the green around him. She swept the optic across the threat zone, marking them one by one in her head. 5 targets, 11 rounds left in the belt. She could do it. First burst, 2 down. Second burst, another fell. The third target scrambling back into cover. She adjusted. For the fourth, squeezed off 2 rounds, missed, her teeth clenched. The man was lining up on Weaver. She exhaled, adjusted by a fraction, and sent the last 3 rounds in the belt. The shooter folded before he could fire. Silence, at least. Silence compared to the storm that had been raging moments ago. Overwatch, this is Hammer, came the voice in her headset, rough with breath. We're clear to extraction. 0 casualties, and Carter. Thank you. She didn't respond. She just fed a fresh belt into the gun in case the jungle decided it wasn't finished with them yet. They made it to the LZ without another shot fired. On the bird, Weaver caught her eye. He didn't say anything at first, just gave a small nod. The kind that carried years of history in it. Finally, as the rotors pounded the humid air, he leaned close enough for her to hear him over the noise. You always were better at this than they wanted to believe. That night, in a dimly lit room, somewhere deep in the base's interior, the 3 plainclothes men from the briefing reviewed the mission footage. She did it again. One of them said quietly, 50+ kills, sub 200 rounds, 0 friendly casualties. The man on the left closed the folder and tapped it once. This isn't just skill. This is doctrine waiting to happen. The invitation came with a NATO crest at the top, not a request, an assignment. Jessica was being seconded to a joint task force operating in Eastern Europe. The mission was part of a multinational operation to intercept an arms convoy headed toward a conflict zone. The convoy was protected by a composite force, professional soldiers turned mercenaries, armored technicals and entrenched positions along the only viable route. It wasn't the firepower that made command nervous. It was the terrain, the road. Cut through a narrow valley with sheer cliffs on both sides. And the defenders had been there long enough to dig in heavy weapons with overlapping arcs. Her orders were clear. She'd take an overwatch position, alongside Allied forces and neutralize key threats to allow the assault teams to breach and capture the convoy intact. It was the alongside Allied forces part that made her uneasy when she arrived at the forward staging point. The air was thick with diesel exhaust and the smell of wet pine from the surrounding hills. Uniforms from half a dozen countries moved between rows of vehicles, their patches like a patchwork quilt of colors and flags. Jessica found her assigned section near a group of tall, broad-shouldered men in camouflage smocks, patterned differently from her own. Their leader, a captain with a square jaw and a faint scar across his cheek, gave her a long look. "You're the American?" His English was sharp, heavily accented. "Yes," she said evenly. "Sergeant Carter." He glanced at her weapon, the M249 slung over her shoulder. "You'll be our machine gun support?" "That's right." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "But it wasn't friendly. You are small for such a weapon." She'd heard it all before. She didn't rise to it. "I'm here because I can keep you alive. That's all you need to know." The captain snorted and turned back to his men. "We will see." The briefing was tense. Satellite imagery showed the convoy would arrive in the valley within 40 minutes. Allied snipers and gunners would be positioned along the cliffs, with infantry teams ready to push in from both ends once the heavy guns were silenced. Jessica's sector covered the northern wall of the valley, rocky outcroppings, narrow ledges, and multiple machine gun nests dug into the cliff face. She counted 9 heavy positions in her area alone. The captain from earlier leaned over during the final map review. "We normally suppress with volume," he said. "Lots of rounds. Keep them down while our men move. I suppress with results," Jessica said without looking up. The insertion was brutal. The helicopter had to skim just above the tree line before setting down on a cramped plateau barely big enough for 3 people. The wind off the rotors whipped the cold mountain air into her face, carrying the faint metallic smell that always told her heavy weapons were already in place somewhere. Ahead, she went prone immediately, setting the bipod against the edge of the plateau. The valley opened below her like a stone funnel, the convoy route a ribbon of dirt and gravel winding between jagged walls. Through her scope, she caught movement. Mercenaries shifting behind sandbags, adjusting belts of ammunition, one man wiping. Condensation from the optics of a mounted gun. Her headset came alive. All Overwatch, stand by. Targets confirmed, wait for mark. Her breathing slowed. The mark came with a single word: execute. Jessica's first burst was 3 rounds into the nearest. Heavy position 2 gunners slumped over the weapon before their loader even realized what happened. She shifted left. 4 rounds, another gun silent. The captain's voice crackled in her ear, sounding both surprised and a little irritated. "You are engaging singles?" "Not singles," she replied, eyes never leaving the scope. Precision bursts. The valley erupted in return fire. Tracers sliced through the air toward her position, smashing into the rock face and sending shards into her cheek. She shifted. Half a meter to her right, enough to throw off their aim, and went back to work. A mounted gun on a truck bed began spraying toward the Southern assault team. She walked a 3-round burst straight into the gunner's chest, then another into. The driver before the truck could reverse out of sight. All Overwatch, heavy guns on south wall are down. Someone called over comes. "Negative," Jessica cut in. 2 more on my north wall. She put them both down before anyone else could answer. The captain's tone changed after that. "You see the bunker with the tarpaulin cover? 460 meters? Got it. It is sweeping my men. Can you?" She was already on it. 3 rounds into the gunner, 2 into the spotter. The position went dead quiet. There was a pause on comms, then, "Confirmed. Thank you." But the fight wasn't over. The convoy reached the kill zone, tires grinding on gravel, engines revving as the drivers realized something was wrong. Defenders poured out from hidden side paths, weapons ready, trying to set up crossfire from the cliff ledges. Jessica's burst became a rhythm: 2 here, 3 there. Adjust for wind, adjust for slope, shift to another angle before counterfire could find her. Her ammo count dipped: 70 rounds, 50, 30. Then she saw the problem. The lead truck had reversed, trying to force the rest of the convoy out of the kill zone. If it made it, they'd lose half the targets. The driver was shielded by a thick pane of reinforced glass hard to penetrate at this angle, but the radiator grill was exposed. She sent a 4-round burst into it. Steam exploded upward, the truck lurching to a stop. All units. Convoy immobilized. Command confirmed. Move in. The assault team swarmed from both ends, securing the vehicles and detaining the mercenaries still breathing. Jessica's belt ran dry with 5 seconds left in the fight. She didn't need the last rounds. When the dust settled, the captain found her at the plateau. His earlier smirk was gone. "You did not miss," he said simply. "That's the point." He nodded once, as if conceding something he'd been holding back. "Your method, it works, even for smaller gunners." Jessica slung her weapon. "It works for anyone willing to learn it." Back at the Joint Command tent, Colonel Johnson's voice came through her headset before she could even take off her helmet. "Carter, debrief with me. As soon as you're back stateside, we've got something bigger coming." Her stomach tightened, not in dread, but in the quiet readiness that always came before the next fight. The mission brief was short enough to fit on a single sheet of paper, which was how Jessica knew it was going to be hell. Colonel Johnson slid it across the table at her in a small, windowless office back at Benning. The fluorescent light overhead hummed faintly. "High-value target," Johnson said. embedded with a well-armed militia in a mountainous border region. They fortified a plateau and ringed it with heavy weapons. We've got one chance to take him alive. Jessica skimmed the paper. The HVT's name was irrelevant. He was a source, not the goal. The goal was extraction without starting a chain reaction that could turn the whole region into a war zone. She looked up. And you want me to keep those heavy guns quiet? Johnson nodded. The assault team can't get near him unless you take them out. 200 rounds, no resupply. You'll be covering from here. She tapped the map. An exposed ridge more than 500 meters out. Jessica studied the angles. If they spot me, I'll be pinned. You won't be alone. Johnson's voice softened. Martinez will be on your flank. They inserted at night, the sky sharp with stars. The air so cold it bit at the skin. The ridge was exactly as the map had shown: bare rock, a sheer drop, and a clear view of the plateau. Jessica set up the M249 low on the bipod, the optic already dialed in for range. Martinez settled 20 meters to her right with a designated marksman rifle, her silhouette barely visible against the jagged skyline. Below, the plateau was alive with quiet movement guards, pacing in arcs, the heavy guns sitting like sleeping beasts under canvas covers. Overwatch, this is Alpha, the assault team leader whispered into comms. On your mark. Jessica's breath fogged in front of her as she exhaled. She found the first heavy gun, its crew leaning casually against the sandbags, their rifles slung. 3 rounds, both dropped. The second gun flared into motion as the first went silent, its crew swinging toward the breach approach. 4 rounds, down. Martinez took the third position almost in the same breath, her single shots cutting through the cold air. For the first 10 minutes, it went like that, a deadly rhythm. Jessica's bursts and Martinez's singles weaving together into a wall of precision fire. The assault team moved like shadows toward the central compound. Then the alarms went up. Lights flared, voices shouted, the defenders pouring out from buildings and trenches. Heavy gun covers were ripped away, barrels swinging toward the valley floor. Jessica's belt count ticked down in her head: 140, 130, 120. Every burst mattered. Every pause to adjust meant someone else could die through her. Scope. She caught a blur of movement at the edge of the plateau. A child, barefoot, maybe 10 years old, running in blind panic toward the nearest line of defenders. Her stomach clenched. He was going to cross straight into the path of the assault team. She could put a burst into the ground ahead of him, scare him back, but that would give away her position. Or she could keep firing on the heavy guns and trust someone else to pull him out of harm's way. Except there was no one else close enough. Martinez's voice came through the headset, clipped and urgent. Carter, I see him. My angle's blocked. Jessica's finger tightened on the trigger, not at a target, but at the space between. 3 rounds into the dirt just in front of the boy's feet. He froze, startled. Kid stopped, Martinez called. Team's got him. Stay on the guns. Jessica swung back to her sector, but those 3 rounds had cost her precious seconds. A heavy gun on the far wall had already spun toward the breach point. She didn't have the luxury of fine calculations, just instinct and muscle memory. 2 rounds into the gunner, 1 into the loader. The barrel swung down, silent. Her ammo count dropped to 50. The plateau was chaos now, smoke curling from burning crates. Defenders shouting over each other. The assault team flooding into the central compound. Jessica kept her scope moving, catching threats in slivers of a second. A fighter leaning out of a tower window. 2 rounds, gone. A pair dragging a heavy tripod toward a wall breach. 3 rounds, both down. A man shouldering an RPG toward the assault team. 2 rounds. Launcher spinning from his hands. Then came the voice she didn't expect. Overwatch, this is Alpha. We have the HVT. We're moving to Exfo. Need immediate cover. She scanned the plateau. Enemy fighters were converging from every angle. At least 30 of them. Martinez's rifle cracked beside her, but there were too many for single shots. Jessica's bursts became shorter, faster, almost staccato, each one buying seconds for the team below. 30 rounds. 20, 15. Extraction route is clear, Alpha called. Moving now. Jessica shifted to follow them through the scope, taking out anyone who even looked like they might raise a weapon. The HVT stumbled once, pushed forward by one of the operators. 10 rounds, 8-5. The last stretch was the longest. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to fire faster, but she forced herself to hold the rhythm. If she broke it, she'd miss. A final burst dropped the last gunner in sight just as the assault team disappeared into the tree line. Her belt was empty. Silence rolled back in, broken only by the wind over the ridge. Martinez looked over, her breath white in the air. 50 kills? She guessed. Jessica shook her head. 51. Back at base. Johnson's voice was waiting for her in the debrief. You saved the target, the team, and a civilian child. That wasn't in your mission parameters. Jessica met her gaze. Neither was failing. Johnson didn't smile, but there was something in her eyes. You've proven your method in every environment we've put you in. We'll be rewriting doctrine because of you. Jessica didn't say anything. She didn't do it for doctrine. Weeks later, back at Benning, a new class of gunners waited for her on the range. Some were tall, some small, some wide-shouldered, some wiry. All of them carried the weight of what they thought they couldn't do. She stood in front of them, the M249 resting lightly in her hands. Never let anyone tell you that you're too small, too weak, or not strong enough for a weapon. System, she said. Every limitation can be overcome with the right technique, enough practice, and the understanding that weapons are tools to be mastered, not forces to be wrestled with. She looked down the line of faces. Sometimes, the person they think can't handle the power is exactly the one who'll show them how to use it perfectly. And sometimes the most devastating automatic fire. She chambered a round, sighted on the first target. Comey's from the most controlled and calculated. The burst rang out sharp in the morning air. The first of many, this ending leaves you with a poetic moral beat and closes the loop on Jessica's arc from underestimated trainee to redefining the role of the automatic rifleman.